System riding to the core. Yeah. Reppin' in the city left.
Today is September 1st. Wake up, wake up, wake up. It's the first day of the month. Get up, get up, get up. I am here with Emoja Lil Tanky Sumler and our special guest, the ghost in the shell, Keita DeMuscle. What's up, everyone? How is your first going?
Man, all is lovely. I thought we was gonna finish singing our little ghetto carols, you know what I'm saying? It's like
ghetto carols.
Yeah, dashing through the snow.
Wow.
Gonna rock it up. Ain't that's the song? All right.
Well, it is now. New ghetto classics brought to you by Lil Tanky.
Ghetto carol. It's like Christmas carols.
Yeah. Stop going. Everyone gets it. You've already made your point.
Okay.
I'm a big fan of Bone Thugs and Harmony, so
I like them too when they was doing that G shit, not first of the month, man.
Got you. Well, I'll let the audience decide what they prefer. Today, as you can see from the title, we're gonna do something a little bit different, but I think it's gonna, be along the same geopolitical lines because everything can be looked at in a political fashion. Everything's political nowadays. Everything's always been political. That's just a silly thing that people say. So let's talk a little bit about UFC welterweight champion Belal Muhammad. Now, let's talk a little bit about what Belal Muhammad has been able to accomplish as he just got the welterweight strap. Yes, what were you about to say?
Well, let's talk about what makes him significant.
I'm going to give the numbers here, and then maybe I'll let you and Muscle just add to whatever. I'm going to just throw this out there, the basics, and then feel free to jump in. So what's interesting about Belal Muhammad, first of all, is he is a Palestinian American. So you can already see from that why his championship reign, or his just championship, his current championship, he just won one, has been so difficult. He's from Chicago. So there's, of course, a Palestinian from Chicago. How could Inner City Left not love this person? And basically, he's been very vocal about Palestine, even pre-October 7th, as many Palestinians, all Palestinians have been. He is on a 10-fight win streak. And in the UFC, that is basically only the all-time greats can go on a double-digit win streak. He's beat a lot of talent up through that win streak. It is not an inflated number. He is 14-1 in his last 15 fights. His last loss coming to a fighter by the name of Jeff Neal, who's also
and that boy got bricks for hands.
He is, I believe, he's a Texas striker. And if you know anything about, those Texas strikers, man, they're very dangerous. But I just wanted to also mention the person that he fought, Leon Edwards, was also on an 11-fight win streak. So
11 fights in a row.
If you can't see why that's problematic, that there can be two undefeated fighters who've gone on these long win streaks, before they can fight the champion, it seems a bit unfair. So anything, let's talk and provide some more context on Belal. I'll give the floor to y'all.
I mean, so one thing I would say about Belal is, immediately they started trying to put this moniker on dude about boring fighter, never gets a finish. But they putting you in against the killer-ass killers, and they're like, oh, we didn't finish him. Yet no one's ever finished this guy. You know what I'm saying? But he was pretty decisively beating them. I think one of the fights where they first started trying to put that on him was when he fought Wonder Boy, which, of course, like, in the MMA world, like, Wonder Boy is like this karate kid, made his way up through the karate scene, what do they call it? The full contact karate fight. He wasn't really, and he did a little kickboxing too, but he's beloved of the fans, right? He is the good, wholesome white guy, yeah, rah, no one roots against him. And of course, right, this is a dude that's out there knocking people out most incredibly one of the best stylists probably in his division. And Belal goes out and manhandles this man. He's not able to get a finish, but he decisively defeats him in a 3-round combat. But because mostly it's wrestling, it's lots of takedowns and ground and pound. And it looks boring if you're not like on top of them mounted, beating the hell out of them. You know what I'm saying? More it just looks like, oh, he tripped them and he's hitting them in the air, you know? But his whole rise had been going up against the biggest killers in the industry. And of course, he's not always able to get a finish. But I tell you what, he did finish. What was the wrestler out of Pennsylvania? That guy, he's straight killer. You don't think he's a killer? Brady, right? Brady was undefeated when he fought Belal. Belal went out there and destroyed this man, dismantled him. This dude who is supposed to be this great American wrestler, Belal goes in there, makes him look easy to the point whereas now everybody's saying, oh, Brady inflated. He was really never that good. You know, it's like you can't have it both ways. Either he really wasn't that good or Belal is just that good. And yet in spite of performances like that, he's never getting a shot. You know, and before October 7th, he was already kind of like getting slid off because he come into the ring with the flag of Palestine. You know what I'm saying? After October 7th, man, it was just a whole nother thing. They did they're giving Kobe other shots. You know, they did everything they could. You know, let's run Leon and Usman again, right? I mean, they did everything they could to keep this man from getting a shot. I mean, that's just my preliminary thoughts on it. Keita?
Yes, it's also the hard, difficult road that athletes have to go through, particularly athletes of color, and in this global environment, what Palestinian athletes are having to go through, because he has been very decisive in talking about, I am Palestinian, I am representing Palestine, that he is very proud of also being Muslim and talking about, I'm not going to fight during Ramadan. I'm not going to do that. And in light of global affairs, too, because one of the many things that are being talked about around Israel's genocide against the Palestinians is how they have killed so many athletes. Of course, there are so many people dying, but how honestly, what Israel has been trying to do is eradicate any cultural recognition of Palestine through their athletes, through their intellectuals and scholars, through their artists in many ways, musicians, dancers, and that is trying to erase Palestine by not allowing a cultural foothold to thrive. And here Belal is and saying, no, I represent my people. In a long history of protests in sports and protests hosted by athletes in a variety of ways, and that how he stands with many Palestinian athletes who also, I want to say many, but like 8 Palestinian athletes who also went to the Olympics and said, well, I have to represent my people because we're in a year of this. And like, what has been done? Y'all aren't listening to our people in Gaza, in the West Bank, saying that we need help, that this has to stop, that there's a reason that this is continuing, and it's because all of you are staying silent. And also to even the Olympics, trying to be like, oh, no politics here, and yet allowed Hitler to host. And being like, oh, we're impartial, we don't do this, and allowing the United States to participate, even though they're not beholden to the same standards that many of these countries are, and yet always wants to celebrate its win. And you can't kind of divorce that even United States hegemony in the way we view sports and how our athletes winning, and how powerful it is for Belal to say, I'm Palestinian, and here I am with the strap. What are you going to do? I'm here to keep this because I want to keep attention on my people and show like what we're capable of.
And one thing I would add is, like you said, that he wouldn't fight during Ramadan. He's the only Muslim fighter that would. You know what I'm saying? Like, there was a time, right? Hamza would be like, "No, I'm not going to do that." You know what I'm saying? And I'm gonna come back to him in just a second. Islam Makhachev, the Russian Muslim, I'm not going to do that. You know, Habib notoriously wouldn't fight during Ramadan. Belal he had to campaign so hard for the strap. He was the one Muslim that was like, nah, I don't care. Like, I will fight this man in Ramadan even. I will do it whenever. But like, to your point about how how much he lives and reps the whole Palestinian identity, right? There have been other Muslims in the UFC that have taken up the cause of Palestine. I brought him up just a little bit ago. Hamzat. Hamzat has said some incredible things about like his rock solid support of Palestine. If you don't know what he said, just Google it, and that's on you, or search engine it. But I remember there was that one time when Hamzat was the boogeyman of the welterweight division, right? And he goes to Belal back when they're both trying to get the shot because nobody wanted to fight Hamzat. I mean, he was that much of imagine Brock Lesnar type of fear and that's what Hamzat was. Everyone was terrified of this dude, and Bilal's the one dude with his hands up like, I'll fight you. And Hamzat's like, oh yeah, we can fight. And when I come to the ring, I'll be rocking the Palestinian flag. And like Bilal's like, no, brother, I'll be rocking the Palestinian flag. I mean, just like that much sauce. Like, not only am I not afraid of you, you ain't never gonna G-check me on this. We both Muslim, but it's different for me. You support Palestine, I am Palestine. And I just thought that was an incredible thing. Because again, this was a time when everyone was ducking Hamzat left and right.
I want to bring this up because you mentioned it, Amoja. The idea that like Belal is a boring fighter, that was sort of the narrative. And pre that narrative, there was a lot of conversation about his authenticity as a Palestinian. Many people were saying, I say people with quotes, were saying, oh, he's not Palestinian, he's from Chicago, as if people don't have multiple identities. And I like to call that the bot op narrative. There is a narrative that is, let's coin that. Let me get the little, Mario coin sound effect.
Bling! Put it on a t-shirt.
There
Put
you go. Put it on a t-shirt. And that is something that I see in the UFC, but not just the UFC. I see it in all sports, not just sports. I see it in music. I see what happens when we see like a particular artist that we know has a connection to them people, and then, I mean, I think the Kendrick Drake Cole beef was all a great example of much ado about nothing and a distraction. And again, you can say if that's intentional or not. We know if we look at the past, historical context says it is intentional. But I think that it just goes back to this like idea that these narratives are trying to be pushed, and people's natural racism, natural, xenophobia or anti-Arab sentiment or Islamophobia, like lends them to go along with these narratives very easily. I wanted to bring this up too, because I think it's important. You mentioned it also, Tanky. There is obviously a reason to hold Belal down because there are people that you want to raise up. And I think the UFC is an interesting example because it is it's one of the few politicized organizations, even, because their whole thing is we got international fighters from all around the world and all different narratives. So because of that, you can dissect geopolitics because you have a Dagestani Russian going up against an Irishman or going up against a white guy from Florida. And I think that, when you talk about sort of I always talk about how the internet is just mainly white feminists arguing with incels. It's a great platform to see incels in their natural habitat when you watch the UFC. And because of that, and because of there's a lot of political leanings within that organization. If you know, it goes higher even than Dana White. I know people look at Dana White as like the end all be all in the UFC, and he's incredibly important, but he's not the final say. If you know.
You got to say, Dana White's managing partner in this venture, his brother was President Obama's campaign manager. His brother, right, is the ambassador to Japan. Like, this is a very powerful man from a very powerful family that has a lot of reason to not want to see any Palestinian celebrate, especially a fighter, a champion.
So, and I hear people say this sometimes, like, oh, sports ball, like trying to make fun that people engage in sports or whatever. And again, you don't have to watch sports if you don't want to, but anything that billions of people watch is something to understand because it's politicized. Did we not just watch the Olympics? Did we not watch the inherent racism, the inherent anti-Islamic, xenophobic, little parts all entrenched within the Olympic Games? We don't, we can talk about the Australian woman in the breakdancing competition and how
What
white
a
privilege.
joke. What a joke. Just totally erased Black people's contributions to the. Yeah, but like you said, I mean, GMK, totally politicized, but people think the absence of something is not political. Yeah, what jokes?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's important to like acknowledge these things because I'm a big fan of the NBA. Me and Tanky were big American football fans. We have a podcast about it way back in the day. And I just wanted to ask this to y'all. Or maybe I'm not asking this. I'm saying this, and I'm asking for your responses. I tend to see like in the NBA, it's something that I see because like in the NFL, you see it because it's at the highest level. It's a very important thing because it's a billion-dollar organization, multi-billion-dollar organization. It's also a political organization. We know people like LeBron James, Tom Brady are political figures. They are billionaires with ties to some of the most important people in the world. And some of those people, even though LeBron James and Tom Brady are different people, a lot of those contacts are the same people. So regardless of whatever it is, these people are highly connected. The leagues are highly connected. And because of that, they have political importance. And so many things go with that. And I just wanted to know if you could talk a little bit about that context of the politicalization of sports in general.
I mean, my mind always goes to there's two great examples, right? You have Michael Jordan, who famously was like, I'm here to play basketball for all of America. You know what I'm saying? Like, keep me as far away from politics as possible.
Republicans buy shoes too.
Right. I mean, come on, man. Come on, man. Right. All the way up to someone like Muhammad Ali, someone who's born Cassius Clay, has a spiritual awakening. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, nah, I'm rejecting my slave name. Literally is his mentality with this. I'm a pacifist. I mean, they were trying to put this man in jail. They stripped him of his titles. You know what I'm saying? I mean, they did everything they could to disenfranchise this man. Simple and plain. Like, all because he would not go to Venezuela. Whoop. Vietnam, I mean, famously saying, the Viet Cong ain't never done nothing to me, and just even that level of politics, it's a big thing.
And was despised for it, I think, is important to acknowledge.
It's funny that at the end of his life, he became the darling of America again, because in his prime, they hated him. They did not love him again until his body and mind were broken. Once the threat of his virile, Black, Muslim masculinity has worn off. And I think Belal is a lot of the same thing. When they saying that he's a boring fighter, this is a dude that's dropping people on their heads in the middle of MMA. I've never seen wrestling like this. I, as a fan, don't tend to be a big fan of wrestlers in the UFC because most of them are just too technical. It's kind of boring. It's all technique. You know what I'm saying? It's not domination in a violent way. It's at least American wrestling.
Methodical.
Right? But exactly.
A lot about positioning.
Man, he's not that guy. I mean, this guy looks like WWE wrestling. We picking people up, throwing them into the ropes and dropping them on their head. What's up? You know what I'm saying? Almost power bombing cats, right? That's not boring.
And he never cheeses it, I mean, he goes in there and he goes to mix it up. And I think a lot of the dominant wrestlers want to go in there, they try to strike, and if they can't, they cheese out the rest of the fight.
Yeah, I mean, compare and contrast him and Kamaru Usman's wrestling. I'm going to grind you into the wall, foot stomp. Ooh, now I'm too heavy. Oh, I'm going to fake like I'm going to take down. Oh, you scared of that because I had you up against the wall. Now I'm going to hit you in the head. Ooh, right? That's not what Belal is doing at all. You know what I'm saying? I mean, he's out there dominantly, like grabbing you like a man, and man, he's like a bear wrestling men. You know what I'm saying? Just throwing them all around. And I think that's such an interesting thing when they say that he's boring. I think they make an assumption about his personality, which I think he's done a good job since he's been the champion of letting his humor out more. Because this boy can troll, man. Just watching all of the troll stuff he be doing on the other fighters in the division, he's able to show that personality now because it's a little bit mean and it's a little bit funny. But before then, he wasn't able to do any of that. He had to be the upstanding, clean cut, non-offensive, just to even get himself in a chance to get the shot. You know what I'm saying? There's no way he could have been rambunctious like a I don't know, like was it Kobe Covington? Like there's no way that he would have ever been able, because what happens when you have people of color out there like that? I think Kevin Holland's a great example. Dana's not calling you a great promoter like he calls Kobe Covington or like he calls Conor McGregor. He calls you a big mouth. You know what I'm saying? He says your attitude is wrong, right? There's no way that Belal could have even been that kind of guy. I mean, they already held him down. They would have they would have held his head under the water if he was that guy. Meanwhile, a guy like Kobe can be as provocative as he wants because he's the right kind of provocative for the desired fan base of the traditional MMA audience. Also, I think because he's not as handsome, right, as a traditional, who he reminds me of? He reminds me of how Dana treated Cyborg. You know what I'm saying? Like, meanwhile, I mean, looking at Bilal's body, I mean, this man is a ripped to shred. He looks like a freaking action figure, man. I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. And so this is kind of like why I think that this conversation is so important and why Belal Muhammad is a microcosm of a larger thing. Because let's acknowledge some American truths, okay? Being Palestinian right now, it's going to be more difficult for you to do a lot of things. Getting jobs, getting grants, getting, into a school. It just is. It's highly politicized, and they know that if you're Palestinian, let's be real, you were Palestinian, and they knew that. They wouldn't let you into a Democratic convention, that's for sure, So let's acknowledge that. Let's also acknowledge a couple other truths that are going on.
They'll let you come. They just ain't going to let you speak.
Right. And they're going to definitely make sure that you are on message, as they say. And that's what happens. They're going to get the person that says yes. And it doesn't matter how loosely tied you are to being Palestinian, they're just going to run with it. And I think because it's important, because this is a microcosm, you can say that the UFC is your job, and it is because it's politicized. I worked in the nonprofit industry for quite some time, and I promise you, every single one of those organizations are highly politicized. You may go into a social justice nonprofit that is beholden to the idea of nonviolent resistance. And unfortunately, nonviolent resistance has not been effective for the most part forever. And why would I then go to a job that says this thing that I'm inherently don't agree with? Because I need to get a job. So if I'm challenged on that, I have to now make a decision. Do I want to lie to get this job and go with the flow? Or do I want to stand my ground and say, you know what, I don't agree with this and I think it's a policy to be changed? Who do you think is going to be hired? And again, to Tanky's point, to Keita's point, they have to work. Someone like Belal Muhammad has to work way harder. And we see this. Kyrie Irving is I'm a big Kyrie Irving fan for basketball. He's judged it by a separate set of rules. He literally tweeted out a documentary about black people being the original Jews and going to return to Israel. Okay. We already know Israel's a white ethno state. Do we got to keep talking about it? So maybe there's some black people in America and throughout the world, okay, that know this. Tweeting it out. It existed on Amazon. It's not some secret PDF file or Google Doc somewhere. It's already accessible. He was suspended for tweeting out the documentary. How could that be? And I think the separate rules exist
Especially with
constantly.
all of these quote unquote space Karen worshipers, you know what I'm saying? Always out in the free speech, free speech. Okay. If you believe in free speech and you think that Elon Musk is some kind of hero, God bless you. How can you then support what happened to Kyrie? I mean,
Yeah, and I think that there's just like this idea that politics does not exist and that there are some people, I'm not going to say just Muslims and Jews, there's lots of different types of people, but because you have a particular spiritual, methodology or ideology or whatever it may be that preclude sort of the general status quo ideas of, even if you're Muslim or Jewish, you do it in a way that's comfortable around Christians. It's comfortable around whiteness. It's a lot like queerness in that way. It's like, as long as you do it Pete Buttigieg style, I'm okay with it. At least a lot of the liberalism feels that way. So you've experienced this, I know, as a Jew. You experience this as a Muslim, as a non-Christian. You experience this as a non-white person. And I think it goes back to this idea of like, most of the like the colleges where they like let in the legacy people, those are white people, and they act like only black people or only POCs are getting these benefits, when in fact white people get the benefits the most, and they're just trying to counteract that. That happens with school accept. We know black men are the last to be hired and the first to be fired. We know that. I mean, it's scientifically true also that darker skinned black people have a less likelihood to get a job. If you have a name that is, not a traditional Christian name, that's another knock.
don't have locks. That's another knock.
I mean,
Even though,
there's such a rich history behind this. And unfortunately, in the United States, of course, that starts with white athletes protesting against having to play against or with Black athletes, starting in the late 1800s, for example. Um, and how it progresses. But to say like sports is not political is to ignore what Black people and Indigenous people and honestly Asian people have had to face in just building America itself. That oftentimes what happened was that there were gentlemen's agreements between teams led by white people, particularly white men who had amassed a lot of their power and money from the enslavement of Black people and the exploitation of Asian people who came to America. But in that is that all of these, like all of us had to protest. We like let's talk about how the native indigenous peoples protested for the longest just against the racist sports names that were taken on, being like, oh, it's just part of US history, you just got to be cool with it. Whereas some sports teams, because little Tinky talked about this with the Blackhawks before, we're like, no, we're going to do this respectfully. Like, you know what, are we even allowed to use this name? What are these conversations that are happening? And to say like that's not political, to even say how the United States exerts its hegemony on global sports events as well. Because the UFC posits that it is a global sports organization, a global mixed martial arts sports organization. And yet, at every opportunity where they can enforce, reiterate, protect white supremacist values, even in bringing Trump to many of their fights and saying like, oh, but we're not political. Why are you bringing your flag? Why are you bringing your country's flag to this? Why are you talking about it? Even in the way that represents itself, because when Russia invaded Ukraine and we were watching the UFC, all these Russian fighters all of a sudden couldn't have their flags. All of a sudden, they were dealing with incredibly hostile crowds and still did have to deal with that at the Olympics. Even Russia being like, or not even Russia, but global organizations, sports organizations saying, hey, you can't compete. And yet giving other countries, particularly the United States, which has such a enormous history of violence and exploitation, but giving them full free leave to start building what the rules are around even how people win in sports. And folks don't want to talk about that either. That like a lot of these rules are for the success of white people in many ways, because that's what Lil Tanky and I were dealing with often in watching American US football. It was like, wait, why is this Black athlete getting sidelined? Why isn't this Black athlete's creativity being celebrated? Why are these folks not being propelled forward in the same ways that we see white athletes who are often more mediocre, getting pressed forward as these big stars?
I mean, I ain't got to tell you, Mr. Drew Law, but I mean, I remember again, as you know, I was a big fan of the Chicago football team. I knew everything Rex Grossman could and couldn't do. Believe you me, nobody broke my heart like that boy. You know, take you to the big dance and then just choke, you know, and then having to watch a so called professional coach be confused as to who's the starter, this man or Donovan McNabb, who's probably a Hall of Famer. Like Rex Grossman, I mean, did you even make it to one Pro Bowl ever in your career?
I mean, the white quarterback is always so politicized, you know, and it's always, we know that the history of football says we don't want a black person, we don't want a black man quarterbacking us. And, you know, you hope that that goes down. But I'm glad you brought up the, you know, the quarterback thing and, you know, the football thing, because two names come to mind. Number one, Colin Kaepernick, Pro Bowl type quarterback, couldn't seem to find a job after he started kneeling, which brings me to another name. We're past kneeling, quote, end quote, JayZ. And it was kind of the final straw for JayZ. For me, I think other people may have, you know, who knows? But, you know, that was kind of like, we're past kneeling and nothing has changed. Every single year, we're seeing more and more people being killed by the police. You would hope those numbers go down, especially since the budgets never seem to. And even when we watch movies where police brutality happens outside of the United States, it's not with guns. In America, the police force is incredible. And to have someone like JayZ, who is supposed to have come, you know, from nothing, from the streets of, you know, Brooklyn, you know, making his way to the top, and buying the Barclays. And, you know, that's one of the most gentrified areas in all of Brooklyn. And it just seems interesting to me that people don't make these connections, or they don't see these connections as highly political, because these people have to talk to the, you know what it is, the deeps, the deep people. And their things have to be confirmed by that. And again, it goes to, can you do what Kamala Harris does? Number one trait left in this world. Are you on message? Did we see that in Syrian? I forget what movie that was, where they're like, you're going off message.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're going off
Gotta
message.
keep them.
But also that there is what we have to acknowledge, especially living in any country that suppresses free speech and dives straight into fascism the way the United States has. What we always have to acknowledge is that the empire is not going to give up a potential avenue of propaganda. That would be ridiculous. They want every possible avenue of propaganda that they can reach to enforce the status quo and to ensure the compliance of the public in the way that the empire wants to move. And yet, what many people represent in this, and like what we can see in talking about activism and leftism in sports, or even protesting in sports, is that everybody has a place in political action too. That nobody is kind of denied the responsibility that they have to each other and to their communities to ensure like that all of us thrive as much as humanly possible, and how also our rights intersect. I think it's bizarro in some cases, particularly for folks who only watch like American sports in particular, or American athletes, but that's secretly how they get your nationalism. They get you on board with being like, I'm American, I'm from the United States. And then people think they cast that off after the Olympics, and maybe some people can, but like, you have to kind of sit with that and acknowledge, what about this sport is bringing out this type of nationalism in me? And then what is the empire trying to like enforce within me and remind me about in the status quo and the way that I need to move so that we can caution against it. I think about all the athletes too who often protest these national anthems that we're kind of forced to be like, well, you have to stand for the American national anthem, regardless of whether you're actually American or not. How we each talked about like some variation of getting in trouble at school because it's like, but you won't even acknowledge that my mom's an American citizen and you want me to raise my hand for this flag and we're not going to also equate it to Hitler in Germany and the way he propelled nationalism on that level, and how nationalism also blinds you from the fact that we as people, as individuals, relate way more to people across a global scale than we do to our own governments.
Yeah, I mean, and I think the national anthem is a great example, right? There's nothing in me as a humanist or as a progressive that wants to, like, even if I wanted to be rah-rah patriotism, right? However I feel about America, I loathe the national anthem. It was written about a man celebrating slavery. I'm sorry. Read the whole poem. Read the whole song. First off, it started off as a poem. It's whack. It's not good. I say that as a writer with published books, so don't think I'm just hating. I'm hating, but it's the expert's opinion, right? But moving past
Called
that,
critiquing.
it's a critique. But past that, looking at Belal, again, I just find it fascinating, right? That, again, to connect it back to geopolitics, he wins his title in Birmingham, Britain. Goes all through there. He gets all of the
That was Manchester.
Manchester, right? He gets all of the local Palestinian and Muslim population super fired up, goes all through the streets, with the belt, like, oh, this is for us. Less than a week later, is when all of those Muslim protests happen. And I'm saying Muslim protests, but what I really mean is Bretonians protesting Muslims, going through stabbing people, beating people up for being Muslim, for being people of color. And it's hard to not see a connection between this, right? Like, oh, they uppity, they don't know their place, they not real British people, right? Like, what does that mean? What does it mean to be a real British person, right? When at the same time, I have to automatically assume Dricus du Plessis is a real African, but like, you know what I'm saying? A Muslim in Britain is not a real British person. Like, I mean,
We have to acknowledge the diaspora. You know what I'm saying? And I mean, as a Jewish person, I think y'all understand. I mean, like the diaspora is real for Palestinians all over the world. I mean, there's major populations of Palestinians wherever you go, simply because there's so many of us that can't be there. Even my father was born into the diaspora. Maybe he was unable to be, in Palestine at the time. So born in Kuwait. I mean, that's just sort of how it goes. And
Exactly.
yeah. And I mean, I think, again, I want to just bring up the op-bot narrative. Please be looking out for that. They're, of course, concentrated messaging. That's what we were talking about with Dr. CBS when we were discussing the new beef between the Black community and the Palestinian community and the idea of watermelon people and all of that stuff.
Watermelon people.
Yeah, and I mean, but we also have to pay attention too, because some of it's going to be obvious. Like Black people would never say that in association with watermelon to us, as Lil Hanky said in previous podcasts. But that also sometimes like that propaganda is not clever. Because I think about even when I was looking up some of like what happened around the Olympics and things like that, and how mostly what I ran into, unfortunately, was all of these lies about North Korean and Chinese athletes and how they would be beheaded if they went back home, or they were now having to do cultural assessments for their to ensure that they adhere to the ideologies of North Korea. And of course, can I find any of this in North Korean outlets or any Asian outlets? But all of the American and British media outlets push this narrative that these athletes were going to be tortured essentially when they went back home. And what does that say, like, what does that narrative try to push about these other countries? How it does absolutely try to other them in so many ways. And yet, we also have to acknowledge the relation. American athletes at the Olympics were like, there's free healthcare here. Let me go get my pap smear. Let me go get my mammogram. Let me go get my prostate exam, which is free where they were. And they don't get that access here in the United States. And yet, people are like, oh, that's totally normal. And as Amin Team K and Lil Tanky have absolutely talked about too, that we have to assess what has been normalized. That was treated as a joke, that American athletes, oh, we're getting free healthcare in Paris. Ha ha ha, that's funny. And yet I have to be alarmed at this complete lie. Like, that's truth. But I had to be more alarmed at this complete lie about Russian athletes and North Korean athletes and the Chinese athletes who had to go back to their country and have ideological training. Like, I'm supposed to believe that, even though I can't find any sources. You didn't interview any of those athletes and talk to them about their culture because you don't want to build cultural understanding with them. But I know that I can relate to them because of how the empire treats us right here in the United States.
And again, I just want to say, when you bring up the Olympics, it's important to acknowledge the United States were not banned from the Olympics when they invaded Iraq, right? Like, so like these rules are wishy-washy at best, right? At best. Like, because essentially Russia utilized the same theory invading Ukraine. You know what I'm saying? As the Americans did. Oh, it's a preeminent threat. Our national security is at threat. Like, none of this fell on the United States. And it wasn't like they got sanctioned by the United Nations to go in there and do this. They just didn't get vetoed out. You know, they went to the United Nations, you know, Powell got up and lied. I mean, it was like wilding. You know what I'm saying? If y'all ain't gonna blah, blah, we'll go it alone, blah. You know what I'm saying? Like, none of that fell on United States athletes as far as the Olympics go.
Yeah, I was just gonna, basically say, like, do folks have any final thoughts, before we wrap everything up? I do think it's again important to at least understand the politics of sports, and I say that also to acknowledge that the reason why the UFC is it can be an important larger analysis of the particular aspect of current end stage or late stage capitalism. Excuse me. Whichever one you think it is because in the NFL, in the NBA, in the NHL, in the MLB, we have something called players' unions, and they have representative power, not just representative symbolic, whatever. They have real power that they have used through unionizing. The UFC is active in union busting. They lost the heavyweight champion, lineal heavyweight champion of the world, Francis the Predator Ngannou, to another organization. Not simply, I don't want to say simply like it's not a big deal, but you're one of the biggest sports, organizations in the world. And your fighters do not have a union because you're actively fighting that. That is a microcosm, and that's why it's beloved by the conservatives. So, and many people, it's a great model to utilize. Hey, let's walk these back. We already saw that they've been given $50,000 bonuses for quite some time. That is now way out of spec. Their bonuses are given arbitrarily. And it's a great way for the rest of the sports world and the rest of the world to pull back on all the progressions we made through all these different athletes in the world and to force these athletes to take a step away from the union ideas and be more interested in pleasing the boss and so on and so forth. Those are my take, and I'll give the final word to Tanky and Muscle.
For me personally, I don't ignore any avenue where I can learn about how people organize, how people protest their conditions. Also, in many ways, as Amin TMK was saying about the UFC's union busting, I also don't want to miss an opportunity to say, like, how do you prevent people from organizing? Because, like, that says a lot too, right? Like, what are the conditions that have arisen that prevents UFC fighters from organizing and having a fighters union, much like other places? But even what did it take for the NBA to get a players union and the NFL to get a players union? And so I don't cut off these avenues personally for me. I even look at on a global scale, as Tanky said, because there's so much that we can learn on a global scale and how people protest and approach combating oppressive forces and trying to get better conditions for their place. And sports is just one avenue. It's not for everybody, of course, but we have to get more creative and we have to be more expansive. And I just think in this way we have so much to learn from some of these protests and what gets achieved through it, and then what other avenues can we actually achieve like change in the ways that we need it in the society. And so for me, sports provide that really interesting. Plus, I have the joy of seeing some consensual violence on TV.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have much more to add other than, it's just interesting how some people can come. I mean, put you like this, okay? Again, if you're an MMA fan, Alex Pereira is a wonderful example. I don't think Alex Pereira even has as many fights in the UFC as Belal has wins. And Alex Pereira was put in a position to have two different belts. He's had what? 3 title fights?
He's like 6-1.
4, something like that.
UFC.
He's had.
He's a great fighter. Not taking away anything from him.
I'm just talking about talent on talent. He don't have 11 wins in the UFC.
I mean, he was accelerated pretty fast up to the title contendership until the eventual championship. Yeah, no, that's true. And you can kind of see it with fighters, and I think like that's important too. Like, what is happening with this fighter? That if I just say it's not about talent, it's not like, what are the conditions? Is it the gym? Is it the promotions that you're getting or lack of promotions thereof? That there's so much that we can see. And then, of course, from there, you can see a pattern of behavior because Dana isn't as clever as he thinks. We've seen this in sports from the NFL days, NBA days, WNBA days, hockey, baseball. We've seen this happen in sports so many times that we kind of understand what are the next steps that are happening. And organizing and players' unions are inevitable. You can't stop that.
What's that Sonny Patterson? We know this place.
Always a quote and a reference from Emoja, that's for sure. I want to give a shout out to our podcast listeners. We know you can't see our lovely faces, but they are. Well, you can't see muscles either way, but me and Tanky, our lovely faces. But want to give you a shout out. We're available everywhere you see podcasts. If you don't want to waste your precious battery on keeping YouTube open, you can definitely check us there. We want to give a shout out to our Patreons. Y'all, it's patreon.com/innercityleft. We're getting a little bit of a following there, a little bit of conversations happening. We also have free subscriptions. If you don't got it now and you maybe want some later, we're not here to tell you no. You can always also support us by streaming our music and purchasing our music. Tanky also has a book out. So, we'll start putting all that stuff in the description, but you know what you can do. Google us. Shout out to our patrons. Kelly, WD22, Nicole, J Goulart 94, No Ground, RK, Paula, Lissa, Lauren, Suzette, Dennis, we love you. We couldn't live without you. For Keita the Muscle, Emoja, Lil Tanky, Somewhere. This is Amin TMK. Peace.
System riding to the core. Yeah. Reppin' in the city left.